Introducing National Streaming Sports, live and on-demand sports talk programming that you can access 24/7. Check us out on YouTube, Facebook, and X. And for the premier sports talk experience, tap into our Roku channel. Start your mornings with Mac and Jack covering all the weekend sports action. Then pour a cup and enjoy all the sports you can drink on the Coffee and Sports podcast. At midday, talk sports from east to west on the Coast to Coast podcast. Followed at night by some hot girl talk with Prim and Proper Sports featuring Sonia Pearson. Talk boxing on the Gloved Fist. Yankee fans tune in for Start Spreading the News. And there's more on the College Sports Huddle and Sports Scope with Robert Butler. And that's just a sampling. There are 20 podcasts in all and 70 weekly shows giving us a 3.4-star viewer rating. To find us on Roku TV, search for National Streaming Sports on the Roku search bar. Click on the logo and you're in. For laptops, mobile phones, and tablets, download the Roku app. National Streaming Sports, live and on-demand sports talk for America.
Football season is here, and SeatGeek is my go-to for buying tickets. Now, with SeatGeek, every single ticket is backed with their buyer guarantee. We've all had plans change, and when you can't make it to the big game, SeatGeek has you covered. They're the only ticketer that allows you to return your tickets ahead of the event for credit with SeatGeek swaps. So when things come up, I know that my tickets won't go to waste. So what are you waiting for? Download the SeatGeek app to maximize your possibilities and shop live events with confidence.
If you like the sweet science, get ready to talk boxing on the Gloved Fist podcast with top boxing writers Frank Lotierzo and Jack Hirsch. Frank, a former amateur boxer out of Philadelphia, writes for NY Fights and can be seen on the Boxing Channel. Jack, an amateur boxer who competed in the New York Golden Gloves, was a 6-term president of the Boxing Writers Association. And now, here's Frank Lotierzo and Jack Hirsch.
And we're back. Welcome to Glove Fist. My name is Frank Lotierzo, former writer, full-time observer, and part-time writer still. Joined by Mr. Happy, Jack Hirsch, former Boxing Writers Association of America president. 6th term, that is. Jack, how are you tonight?
Hey, good, Frank. I just got on. Our producer, Mac, did he send you the link early with time?
I had no trouble getting on, Jack. You're not having a good weekend.
I'm not. I'm a little off my timings, but I made it on time. It's kind of like a team meeting, Frank. The coach has a team meeting, and right before the door gets shut, you kind of slip into the room, and you grab a seat in the back, and the coach is maybe a little ticked off, but then his eyes wander and he sees you sitting in the back. So, you don't get fined. He's not thrilled, but you did make it on time.
All right. Well, we're back. It's good. We have a few things to talk about. Let's get the fun part out of the way, and that's the football talk. And I do accept your apology because based on your picks this weekend, you still can't hold this straight face and say that you think Ken Norton would have beat Ron Lyle. Okay? So let's put that to bed for now.
Well, I
Jack?
didn't have time in the college semifinals. You kind of rushed it on me. Notre Dame, Penn State. I was firm on Texas because I did pick them to win the national championship. And I was going to back off Texas. And it was a closer game than people actually realized.
It was. It was.
The score was a little deceiving. And the perception of Ohio State being clearly a better team than Texas. They are a better team, but clearly a better team. That perception, I think, is a little distorted.
Jack, sometimes you just can tell it's a certain year. And I haven't been shy about it. I've made a lot of money betting on Ohio State in these playoffs. And every dime I've made, I am going to dump on them to beat Notre Dame on the money line next Monday night. I don't like doing the points because that last score, as you know, can always mess everything up. A lot of people are mad that Saquon Barkley didn't score a touchdown for the Eagles because that changed a few bets. But I think the safest bet in football this year has been in the playoffs, Ohio State on the money line. I am not going to change on that. As far as the Vultures, they did not look great, but they just have so many ways to win games. Jalen Hurts did not look good, but their defense did. Jordan Love had a bad day. They just couldn't get it going. I expected the Vultures to win. I think that they'll crush whoever wins tonight between the Rams and the Vikings. As far as the AFC goes, boy, Jack, there are some good games. I know you picked the Texans to come out of the AFC, and Jack, that doesn't look so bad right now. It really doesn't. That team is tough, and they know how to win. And the Buffalo Baltimore game, I don't know who I like in that game. Derrick Henry may be the difference. The quarterbacks may offset. Derrick Henry may be the difference.
You know, I was talking with Mac in our morning show about letdowns, and I don't think any athlete in any sport, and we've seen that in boxing, can be as up for one fight as their ultimate fight. A team is up for an ultimate game. And you
I agree.
The Ravens and the Bills. If the Ravens are to win at Buffalo, and let's say Houston wins at Kansas City, don't tell me, even though the Ravens will be one game away from the Super Bowl, they're not going to be as sky high at home for the Texans as they would being on the road against Buffalo, because they'll feel, well, we're at home, we're better than them, we're going to prepare well, we're going to get it done. But the emotions are a little stronger for some teams than other teams. And I think that that's a danger point tonight for the Minnesota Vikings. They were so sky high for that Lion game. They cannot be as up for the Rams emotionally as they were for the Lions. It doesn't mean they won't be well prepared. They won't be playing very hard. But mentally, you lose a little, like Apollo Creed said in the movie to Rocky, Eye of the Tiger. You kind of lose it a little bit.
I agree with that, but one of our favorite people, Bill Parcells, said, "Man, if you have to get motivated for the playoffs, you're not in the right field." So, but I do agree. Even though it's just different when you have that mission, when you have that edge. That's a really tough game to call tonight. If I'm an Eagles fan or a Vultures fan, I'm not. But if I were, I'd be rooting for the Vikings. The fact that I want to see the Vultures beat, I'm kind of pulling for the Rams. And the reason is the Rams, their core has won a Super Bowl. Their coach has been through these games before. He knows what's important. I don't think they'll be all by the moment if they have to go to Philly. The weather will be an issue. Where the Vikings, to me, are one of those teams, they're sort of like the Dolphins. It's like they'll tease you that they're good. Then when they get in a big spot, they come undone. That's a really hard game to call. In the other NFC game, Jack, that Redskins Buccaneers game was a great game, and I think the Eagles caught a break. The fact is that the only way they could meet the Skins is if they play in the NFC Championship, because the Eagles have trouble with mobile quarterbacks. And Jalen Daniels is the only mobile quarterback left besides Hurts in the NFC side.
I don't think they caught a break. I mean, these things are a case of be careful what you wish for sometimes, who you play in the playoffs. Lions should beat the Commanders pretty easily. I think they're going to roll over them. It's a great season for the Commanders no matter what.
Absolutely.
They could lose 40-0, and they can laugh and joke in the locker room as far as I'm concerned, because they've had a great, great year. They're going to be under a little less pressure. If I'm the Eagles, I would rather face Sam Darnold than Matthew Stafford.
Agreed.
But when you look at the Vikings, they're loaded on offense. I mean, Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, a running back, Aaron Jones.
Do you like a dome team going to the basically the jungle of Philadelphia in bad weather? That scares me. And Sam Darnold, I'm still not sure which version shows up. I know Stafford is going to bring his A game.
Exactly. Well, that's the whole thing about it. I'd rather face Darnold than Stafford, because Stafford isn't going to play a terrible game.
No.
At best, you contain Stafford, and he has a so-so game. But Darnold might play a great game against the Eagles, but I could see him imploding with 3 interceptions, overthrowing his receivers. So it's an X factor there. But listen, look out for the Houston Texans. The door got open to them. They're back to where they were early in the season with that defense. Forget about those late season games now. And remember, a couple of weeks before the regular season ended, they gave the Chiefs a very tough game at Kansas City.
Was what, 24-19?
And it may have been 27-19 ultimately, but they were hanging in the whole way. And when a team has won a lot of close games, you know who the Chiefs remind me of? Remember when Chris Eubank was winning all those close decisions, and he had the nickname Simply the Best? Johnny Barr said his nickname should be Simply the Blessed, because he kept getting split decisions.
I remember that.
And you keep getting those split decisions, Frank. Eventually, the judges are going to kind of go against you. It happened with Ali, De La Hoya. They kept getting the calls. I know football's different. It's not as subjective, penalties withstanding. But these things kind of turn around, a little bit. And they just have to turn slightly. You know what who this Chief team reminds me of? The 49er team that was looking to three-peat. Similarly, great team.
The 90 team.
Everyone thought they would do it, and then
they got beat by the Giants, who kicked 5 field goals.
Exactly. I mean, and all of a sudden you turn around and not in the Super Bowl. And they beat the Giants during the regular season 7-3, in their game. So, I mean, there's such a small margin sometimes, winning, losing. And I think we tend to judge based on reputation to a large degree.
Okay, before we get to a huge story in boxing, instead of picking each game next week, let me ask you this. Of the 4 games, who do you think is the most sure bet to get the win?
I can't say because we don't have the 4 games set. I got to see how the Rams and Vikings look. I have a good idea what's what. I'm probably picking the Eagles to beat either the Rams or the Vikings. That's not likely to change on tonight's game. But who's more likely could be tougher to spring an upset. The Vikings are more talented, but something tells me the Rams, have it a little more.
The Rams are coming in hot, unlike the Steelers.
Yeah, it's the 4 games. The Baltimore-Buffalo game's the hard game to pick.
That's the hardest one to pick, no doubt.
That's the hardest because it's at Buffalo.
That's what. If it was at Baltimore, I don't think I could go with Buffalo, but I could see a case for Baltimore because of Derrick Henry at Buffalo. All right, I'm going to say this, Jack. I don't care if the Vikings win 80-0 or the Rams win 80-0. Neither team is going to beat the Vultures. So I'm going to say for one more week, they're the best bet in the NFL.
I got to give Pax, the Philly sports guy, your buddy, a lot of credit because he's not coming in at the playoffs. I haven't heard him the last couple of weeks. He made it very clear before the regular season began. He forecasted Philadelphia at Detroit in the NFC Championship game, and he admitted he was worried, and if push came to shove before the season, he'd have to pick the Lions to win that game if pushed on the prediction.
That says a lot for him because I thought the Eagles would come out of the NFC, but I actually like the the Vultures over the Lions if that's the NFC game, and I know I'm in the minority there.
Pats might be changing. If once the game arrives, if it arrives, he might actually say he's picking Philadelphia at that point. But But yeah, but listen, it's all about practice. It's like a fighter who spars lackadaisically in the gym. The Philadelphia passing attack got a little complacent during the season. They can't
Hertz was a little rusty last night.
and they're going to be forced to call. They're going to have to call upon it at some point. If they want to win the Super Bowl, they're not going to do it just running the ball with Saquon Barkley as their primary, mode of attack. Jalen Hurts is going to have to really be passing a lot and be in sync with A.J. Brown, which he isn't, and make better use of Devontae Smith.
Jack, if somebody would have said to me yesterday that the Eagles are going to win by almost 2 touchdowns and A.J. Brown was only going to have 1 catch and Hurts was only going to have like 140 yards passing, I would have said no way. So I think they're going to get better as the tournament proceeds.
Let me just say something to make a boxing comparison. The Packers, the team I picked to win the Super Bowl, who imploded, I haven't seen a team like that argue so much amongst themselves in a long time. They reminded me of Leon Spinks in the rematch with Ali. Everyone in the corner, this complete.
George Benton left after what, the 6th round or 7th round?
Yeah, George Benton left. They had a thing where the cornerman gave Leon Spinks instructions once every 3 rounds. It's like they took turns.
They alternated. I remember that. Yeah, I'm surprised Benton even stayed for 7 rounds.
Yeah.
All right, Jack. There was a bombshell today, which I think it's a bombshell because there's a huge money fight out there for this particular fighter, and that is the Gypsy King, Tyson Fury, who announced today all over on social media, print media, everywhere, that he was retiring from boxing. Do you believe him?
I don't like to ask a question when I've been asked a question, but let me ask you a question, Frank, and then I'll answer. Do you think Tyson Fury has any credibility in his announcement? Any credibility altogether, what he says?
None.
None. He's going to come back in all likelihood. I made a mistake once that I can remember in miscalculating a fighter's retirement, and that was with Marvin Hagler when I was asked would he come back to the ring, and I said without a doubt. And
after the Leonard fight?
After the Leonard fight, yeah.
Okay.
But, after a year passed and the Leonard fight wasn't on the horizon, the rematch, Hagler decided to heck with it. And even though he was offered a rematch 4 years later, Leonard bumped into him in the men's room, and Leonard was very coy. Said, Marvin, there are a lot of people that are talking about me and you fighting again. Is it something that you might be interested in? And Hagler just said to him, get a life, and walked out. That was the end.
I remember that.
At that point, 4 years later, I think with Tyson Fury, he's definitely going to come back. There's too much money to be made in a Joshua
Exactly.
fight. Too much. And if anything, this might drive the price up. There's a good chance would drive the price up. His Excellency is going to say, what are you doing? All the money to be made. Frank Warren, who won't push him, will be very coy. Say, Tyson, if you want to stay retired, do it. I support you, but I want you to know the amount of money out there. I have an obligation to tell you. He's going to keep reminding him. And it's the money's too great, but the time he might take off. Let's say Tyson Fury doesn't fight for a full year going forward. With his big body, that will work against him.
Sure, he'll gain weight. It'll be harder to lose. And the other risk he's taking is if Joshua takes another fight in the interim and gets beat. That kills that. I see Bacoli's begging to fight Joshua again or fight him. I don't know if that fight is a smart fight for Joshua. I don't like that fight at all, actually, for Joshua.
I think it's the names, Frank. I don't think a Joshua Fury fight can ever get killed no matter what because it has name value. For example, Deontay Wilder. Get him an easy fight on an undercard of a big show. Let him win by a knockout, and all of a sudden match him and Joshua. It won't do as good a business as before, but it would still do really big business because there'll be a certain magic. Oh, Joshua's finally fighting Wilder. Never mind that Wilder's a completely shot fighter, completely through. Just get him a win against someone. That's the sick nature of boxing. Get Keith Thurman 2 easy wins, and you can
And
match
he's a factor again, right?
Yeah, because he has name value. And that's the sick part about boxing. You can have a long period of inactivity and return to the ring. Heck, Mayweather Pacquiao would be one of the highest grossing fights you could make if they actually made it now. Okay, let me throw this at you, Frank. Think of the top 10 fights that could be made in boxing. I'm not asking you to think of 10 of them, of course, but Mayweather Pacquiao, it would probably make the top 5. Think of all the great possible matchups you could make.
It's
Mayweather
crazy, but
Pacquiao
you're right.
Better business than Canelo and Crawford, actually. I mean,
Well, Jack. I want to revisit Canelo Crawford when we're done with Fury.
Yeah.
So we both agree that Fury, it's a smokescreen. It's a fugazi. We will see Tyson Fury fight again. I think we're both on the same page there.
He might mean it, but he might mean what he says now. But he's so irresponsible. He can wake up next week and decide, what the hell? Let me have just.
And there's too much money.
Let me get my, 100 million or whatever the heck His Excellency is going to pay, and I'll smash Joshua. It'll help my legacy. I'm going to go out a winner. I'll go out a hero in England. And Joshua's talking about retiring now. He doesn't want to go on that much longer. He doesn't seem to be that motivated. Joshua had a contractual right to enforce a Daniel Dubois rematch. Notice he hasn't done it. He did it with Usyk. And Joshua, say what you want about him, he has a big heart. The only fighter he ever ducked, and I think it was more Eddie Hearn is promoted than him, was Deontay Wilder. Joshua showed us the way he went back in with Usyk immediately after losing the first time. He has intestinal fortitude.
Absolutely. All right, so money is going to bring Fury back. We both agree. At the end, we both agree. We'll see Tyson Fury fight again. But let's play devil's advocate, Jack. Let's say he never fights again. Frank Warren's out there saying that he's the best heavyweight of the era. An all-time great.
The co-best. I guess he meant right. Usyk. At least Frank Warren is pulling back and we're not hearing any of the nonsense about Fury being robbed. Warren is playing it down the middle now. No, notice this, Frank. Notice this too. A picture sometimes can be revealing, sometimes not, of course. They had this celebration for the ring, and all these mega celebrities, would stand next to one another. All the way in the front row, next to one another, was Warren with Usyk, Fury's opponent.
I didn't see that. I didn't see the picture. I saw a bunch of them, but I didn't see the picture. Jack, if I said to you, what do you think Tyson Fury's title bout record was, what would you say?
Oh, I don't know the numbers off the top. I look at legacies. I could tell you his title defenses, who he fought, so on. Look, there were the 2 losses to Usyk and a draw with Wilder. Most people feel he won the fight. There was a draw with Wilder. It was hard done. And he stopped him twice after that. So we're going to look at the Wilder series as being basically dominated by Fury. There are no arguments there. And then there are the 2 close losses to Usyk, and they were both very close fights. He could have arguably been given the decision without it being a robbery in either fight, but Usyk legitimately squeaked out both fights. And
so Tyson Fury in title fights, Jack, is 5-2-1 with 4 knockouts. Does that make him an all-time great?
Well, what's Jack Dempsey's record in title bouts? I could say the 2 losses to Tony. What was he, like 6-2? 7-2?
6-2, 7-2.
Yeah, I mean, it's comparable if I want to look at it that way. I mean,
I think George Foreman is only like 6-2-1.
Yeah, and Ali lost to Frazier, Spinks, and Holmes. So
Allie's 22-3,
yeah, which is remarkable. And Lewis, I mean,
25
Lewis,
and 1.
yeah, Lewis only lost one title bout, and that was to Ezra Charles. When you think of it, the loss to Schmeling and Marciano.
Before he won the title, and he was right.
Right. So Lewis has the highest percentage. Klitschko, he lost to Lamont
25 and 4.
Yeah, so Klitschko is in the discussion. Lennox Lewis, 2 losses, in there, and the draw with.
I think Lewis is 15-2 and 1.
Yeah, okay. So Fury didn't have a lot of title bouts. I look at legacy. You need legacy.
But I think the title bout record does form the legacy.
Not really. I'm going to give you. You know who I spoke to today on the phone? Michael Nunn. And the reason I spoke to Michael Nunn, I'm writing a story on him for the Journal for the International Boxing Hall of Fame weekend in June. So I spoke to Michael Nunn, very personable. But before calling him, I'm thinking, what was Michael Nunn's legacy fight? He was 58 and 4. 58 and 4. And
that's his final record?
A final record, but only got knocked out once, stopped. And that
by
was
Tony.
Right, and he was winning that fight.
He dominated that fight.
The 11th round, he just happened to get nailed. That's all there was to it. It could have happened to anyone. What happened to Nunn? Okay, but again, where was Nunn's legacy fight? There was solid victories over good fighters, maybe not in their prime. Iran Barkley, Donald Curry, Marlon Starling. Sambo Colombi is the closest to a legacy fight, the one-punch knockout. That's what we're going to think of, where he looks spectacular. None. But let's face it, Sambo Colombi is not like beating Tommy Hearns. And that's what was a problem with Vladimir Klitschko, his legacy fight. Now, you mentioned Tyson Fury. What was his one legacy fight? Was it outpointing Klitschko, who was kind of 40 years old? Now we know he had something left, but was towards the end. I mean, was it?
Well, his legacy fights are probably Usyk, for the fact that if he wins those fights, it secures everything about with his legacy and his greatness, but he didn't win them. So if we're going to say, what's his signature win?
You're right.
Jack, I would have to say it's Klitschko.
But
more so than Wilder. The fact that I don't want to hear, I mean, everybody's going to say, well, Klitschko doesn't have a legacy fight and he didn't fight to have the greatest names on his resume, but he was in the midst of a 10-year unbeaten streak where he went like 22-0 in title bouts with 15 knockouts. And if you fight 22 title fights, there's a few guys in there that could fight and nobody defeated him. So I would have to say Tyson Fury's his legacy is probably that he ended the Klitschko era.
Well, but when you think of it, you make a great point. He didn't win the fights, but his legacy is going to be tied to Usyk more than anyone else. It's just the way it is. And you know what made Muhammad Ali so special? He had multiple legacies. I mean, it's hard enough to get one legacy opponent your whole career. Really, really hard.
Ali and Leonard had that in common.
Yeah. Ali had Foreman is a major part of Ali's legacy, and Frazier. And I'm not sure which is the greater legacy opponent, Ali Frazier, Ali Foreman. It actually might be Ali. Foreman might be more a legacy opponent for Ali than Frazier.
I think he is.
Yeah, the rope-a-dopes become part of American culture. We hear the commentators talking about what's going on in the world with countries fighting, at war. One rope-a-doping the other. They're using the term.
The fact, I think it's Foreman because he was such a prohibitive underdog. He had, at that time, he had even the score with Frazier, and the fact that Foreman did what he did to Frazier elevated him above Joe, and the fact that then Ali came along and defeated him. And again, he was such a big underdog. I think that was his legacy fight. And as I have said for years and on this show, Ali losing the fight of the century was maybe the best thing that ever happened to him because it carved the way for him to build his legacy. Where if he wins the first fight like he won the second fight and he wins a close, unanimous decision, the thought would have been Frazier was a caretaker, held the title to Ali, came back, and then then Ali comes back and he outboxes him. Where by Joe winning that first fight, that solidified, and because the way the fight unfolded, that he had to reach back and be great. I think that solidified his legacy.
You're probably right, Frank, but especially you mentioned a point, had Frazier lost, he wouldn't be so revered. Let's say Ali knocked Frazier out late in the fight, a spectacular fight. He came from behind. Would we have looked at Ali as, wow, coming back after that layoff, he's the most spectacular fight in history? Or would we have taken a little edge off the spectacular victory by Ali had it happened, thinking that, it's not the Smoking Joe that we know who completed the fight.
Right. I think that would have been the case. I think if he would have won the fight of the century, it would have been, yeah, he's great. We knew he was great, and we know that I think Frazier's legacy really takes a hit if he loses that fight, where Ali's didn't, even though he lost it. So I'm going to go back. The fact that he lost that fight. Now, I cried that night, but if somebody would have said to me down the road, this is going to be a blessing in disguise, and it gave him two dragons to slay, Jack. Frazier beat him. Foreman comes along and beats him. It's like, wow, Ali's actually the third best heavyweight.
I'm going to ask you a question you probably never asked before. If you had to say, what's the most spectacular knockdown in boxing history? Two of them.
Frazier putting Ali down.
Or maybe Furbo knocking Dempsey out of the ring. Either one.
I'm going to go, Jack. I'm going to go by what I witnessed in my lifetime. So okay. I'm going to discount that, but that could be up there. But to me, I mean, Frazier knocking Ali down was on every page across the world, not just the U.S.
Yeah.
I think that's the most celebrated knockdown.
Let's say hypothetically, Frazier didn't knock Ali down in that round, and the fight ended without a knockdown. Would our perception of the fight of the century have been diminished by a lot?
That's a great question. Well, I don't know. You know what, Jack? That really did put an exclamation point on it. And even though I don't think there's a case, that decision would also be a little more disputed than it is.
Let's say no knockdown happened in the 15th. Ali clearly won the round and threw in a couple of Ali shuffles and clearly won the round. Frazier still would have gotten the decision because he was clear on points. That would have really bolstered the case for Ali. We would have had to try to convince people that Frazier really did deserve the decision.
That did separate them that night.
If that happened and Frazier won a close decision, didn't knock him down, I think it would be Smoking Joe, even if he got the decision, would be pushing for an immediate rematch if possible. He would be anxious to get him in the ring again. And Ali would probably avoid him for a little while. Make money, do this, say, no, I beat him before. I'm not just because he wants to. He
wouldn't have had the edge like he had after losing to him. I agree with that. Yeah. Jack, think about this too. And this comes up, at least for me, this time every year. Do you realize it? And I know you do. That Ali, Frazier, and Foreman were all born within a week of each other. Different years, but between January 10th and the 17th, and the fact that that they dominated that era, and the fact that all three were undefeated until they fought each other. Frazier gives Ali his first loss. Foreman gives Ali his first, or gives Frazier his first loss, and then Ali gives Foreman his first loss. I mean, we just don't. Did we know at the time back then how lucky we were to be living at that time?
It was a great era, and you especially look at the quality of Ali's victories. I mean, his second-tier opponents were legitimately excellent, contenders. Jerry Quarry, Ron Lyle. These guys were solid, very top-of-the-line contenders who would have been champions in another era, good chance. And Ali, and Ali just routinely would fight guys like that. After losing to Frazier, he fights Jimmy Ellis, a heck of a fighter who was a contender. I mean, and then he goes on and on. George Chuvalo, Floyd Patterson again. Patterson was excellent even in the rematch. But Ali would routinely take these guys on one after the other. I mean, he had a couple of clunkers in there, easy opponents, now and then, but he was entitled to that.
Look, that's why it's so hard to rate anybody above him, for the fact that he just had the names and he just fought everybody, and he fought them more than one time when he had nothing to gain. That's why it's so hard to take it away from him. And by the way, I didn't tell you this. Someone sent me a tape or a YouTube clip. It was on Jerry Quarry, and you were interviewed in it. Jerry Quarry said, the title is, he said he could have defeated Marciano. And you, Randy Gordon, Robert Mladenovic, the Cassidy brothers were in it. It was an interesting clip. And you talk about Quarry and how he was, a victim where he just came along at the wrong time, and he just wasn't quite good enough to run on that fast track. How long ago was that, Jack? When was that?
I did it last June.
June 24?
No, I think it was June before last.
All right, so it's a year and a half old.
Yeah, I believe. I forgot, was it last June or the June before? I did it up in Canastota for the Hall of Fame weekend, and but that's the whole thing with a lot of these champions. It's when you've come along. I mean, that's the whole thing. I mean, if guys like Quarry, came along during the era after Gene Tunney, when you had Carnera, Sharkey, Schmeling, Bear. I mean, there's a good chance Quarry becomes heavyweight champion.
He gets it. He might have gotten a piece of the title.
And it's a very unpopular thing to say that Quarry may have beaten Marciano. Very unpopular thing to say, because people get outraged, like insulting their religion or something when you say that. But but Quarry had really quick hands. I mean,
I think you summed it up best when you made that breakdown, and I think it comes down. Marciano pulls away in the second half of the fight.
There's a good chance that happens. That Marciano, who could take a great punch himself, he takes everything Quarry throws at him, and then in the 15-rounder, Quarry, he's not a solid 15-round fighter who's going to fight hard from rounds 1 to 15. And if nothing else, Marciano's conditioning was, worldly. I mean, no one trained harder than
Marciano. He could sprint for 15 rounds. Quarry couldn't.
Right. And Marciano, you take round 11, 12, 13, 14. Is Quarry really going to be able to stay with him at that point in time?
Yeah, I don't. It's like the Frazier fight, only it probably goes more rounds. But I think Rocky wins. You talk about guys being born at the wrong time, and there's a lot. But in my lifetime, and I think you'll agree with one and disagree with the other, but I think two fighters that were really cursed by their birth certificate, and they fought during the same time, are Esteban de Jesus having to deal with Duran, and Rodrigo Valdez being in the same pool with Monzon.
Yeah, I mean, you make a good point. Well, De Jesus, did fight Duran and beat him. And that's always going to be remembered as a legacy fight. But I have to caution you a little bit there. If Duran never came along, his chief rival would have been Ken Buchanan in the prime of Buchanan's career. And prime for prime, Esteban de Jesus against Ken Buchanan, going against one another, I would have given a small edge to Ken Buchanan. I feel he would have.
That's interesting, and I would have given a small edge to de Jesus. And I'm actually a bigger fan of Buchanan, but I think de Jesus would have just fought him like Ismael Laguna, but I just think he would have been a little bit quicker to the spot. I'd like de Jesus to win a very close contested decision, but it's not one that I would bet on. And we don't know because Duran never fought, or Buchanan never fought Duran again, where de Jesus showed in 3 fights, he wasn't Duran's superior, but he was almost his equal.
And Valdez, you're right. It's interesting how Valdez would have done against the middleweight champions, let's say 20 years before him, against the Carmen Basilios, the Gene Fulmers. He would have acquitted himself well. Whether he would have beaten them or not, that's debatable. You know, we could argue that.
I could see Valdez being on the same level as like a Dick Tiger.
Yeah, that's fair. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
In fact, Jack, I thought I never did this, but I thought of doing a post one time. To me, that would be one of the harder fights to make a case for one guy over the other. And if you think about it, Rodrigo Valdez handled Benny Briscoe easier than Monzon did. And even Russell said that he worried about Briscoe more against Valdez than he did Monzon. That says a lot about Valdez.
When you're 3 for 3 against Briscoe, it says a lot. And keep this in mind. In Briscoe's
and he stopped him cold.
Monzon, his 2 fights against Monzon. The first one was a draw in Argentina. Keep that in mind. And in
67, yes.
I asked Russell about that. He wasn't there for the draw fight. And he didn't hear anything about Briscoe getting robbed or this or that. You know, so he's unclear what went on. But it's safe to say the judges in Argentina they didn't rob Monzon. That's, that's safe to say. And then in the rematch, even though Monzon won comfortably boxing from the outside, Monzon was never so hurt when he got hit with that shot in the 9th round. He didn't see it. Yeah, and was looking up at the clock, that drama.
Yeah, there was like 45 seconds left in the round. You see him look right up. What bothers me about that fight, Jack, is a lot of guys that try to compare Monzon and Hagler. They always make the case, well, Briscoe had Monzon really hurt. And if he could, Hagler could. And what they miss is the fact is, going forward, Briscoe was a bigger one-shot hitter than Hagler coming forward. Where if Hagler fought Monzon, I actually believe that he would have fought as the aggressor like he did against Duran, more so than the counter guy as he did in most of his other fights.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes a fighter gets hit with a punch he doesn't see, and it's a little bit of an aberration where one fighter can hurt him and another can't. Look at all the punches to the chin that Corey took against Frazier. And Frazier never floored him with a punch to the chin. He did once with a punch to the body. All those left hooks, right hands. Yet it was George Chuvalo who just happened to catch him with a perfect punch, knocked him down. So,
which shows anybody can be knocked down or out.
Right. Exactly.
If they get caught right.
Yeah, exactly. Now, we were talking before. I think it's going to become a reality. You wanted to get into it. Canelo and Crawford. And to me, if that fight hasn't passed its expiration date, it's getting close.
It's close.
Maybe the expiration date says this expires December 2025, then it doesn't count at all. As far
well, they're talking about September, right?
Yeah, but why September? If you're going to make the darn fight, make it. What is the purpose? Win January.
And Crawford will be 38 in September.
Why 8 months?
He will have, if that's when they fight, he'll have fought one time in 25 months. That's a big layoff.
Is that Canelo with the date of this? I mean, I didn't like the way Crawford looked with Magramov. I did. That was not the same Terence Crawford to me. You could say, well, he clearly won the fight, deserved the decision. There should be no controversy. Fine. I'm not going to argue that point. But he did not look like the spectacular fighter that I've seen throughout his career. He just didn't look good. Something was missing.
Okay,
And,
Jack, but you could say that about Ray Leonard against Kevin Howard. Didn't look good at all. Look worse than Crawford did, and then came back 2 years later and beat Hagler.
But Leonard was coming off a layoff of close to 3 years when he fought Kevin Howard.
He was also 25 or 26.
Well, whatever. But okay, yeah, and that's what caused a lot of people to dismiss Leonard's chances. I get all that, but Crawford is always in the gym. I mean, that's what he does in Omaha. He loves the gym. He loves hanging out there.
Still not the same as fighting, but it's better than the opposite, than not being in the gym.
It's not the same exactly. And Canelo hasn't, he hasn't been looking good. Timmy Bradley said it best. I don't want to hear all the talk about Canelo knocking out Crawford.
Well, who's the last person he stopped, right?
And Edgar Berlanga, to me, is terrible, and it was a competitive fight.
Jack, I'm a huge fan of Crawford. I worry that if he loses his last fight, I think it's going to really hurt him with people that don't understand boxing or know what they're talking about. I think it's a great fight to ponder, and there's a case for Crawford because stylistically he can be the type guy that has given Canelo trouble. I agree with Bradley when he said, who's the last guy that if Canelo's such a killer, who's the last guy that he stopped? But let me ask you this, because I had a couple guys ask me this actually today. If Crawford were to win a close 7-5 unanimous decision, where would you rank that as margin or magnitude of victory? And I said off the top of my head, if Crawford beats Canelo and it's not controversial and he wins, it's the biggest win since Leonard beat Hagler.
Well, what would happen if Crawford won a close decision over Canelo? Let's say in a thrilling fight, 7 rounds to 5. Immediately, you're going to hear your favorite fighter, Frank Floyd Mayweather Jr., come out and start saying, well, I beat him easy. What's the big deal? I was the same age, he'd say, practically, or whatever that Crawford was. I forgot what Mayweather's age was when he fought Crawford.
He was 36 or 37.
Right, exactly. He'll make that comparison.
He can say that.
But, Frank, there's a difference between you and I, hardcore fans, as opposed to the average fan. The other day, I went into a restaurant. I had on a boxing shirt. And they strike up a conversation with me about boxing. And, the guy didn't know many fighters. I said, well, who are your favorite fighters? Who have you heard of? Who do you think's great? And he goes, Mayweather. I mean, no one says Terence Crawford amongst the average person. I think it's getting to the point, Frank, where the average person, period, would have maybe heard of Mayweather's name. He's maybe crossed into that. Take, for example, the average woman who's a non-sports fan, who's in food shopping. You stop her and you say, have you ever heard of the name of Floyd Mayweather? She might
Wendy
say,
knows who Mayweather is. She doesn't Crawford.
He's the boxer. She might say. There's no way she's going to say Terence Crawford. But I was surprised once, Mac. I was getting a vaccination, and the nurse vaccinating me heard of Crawford, and I was astonished. She said, no, the only reason I heard of him because my
from Omaha?
boyfriend has company. They come over, we have a little party, and we saw his last fight. That was a rarity.
I think if and what I would say to Mayweather is I would say, Floyd, you beat Canelo before he reached his prime, and you made him come in at 152. Crawford beat a far more formidable, better fighter mentally and physically than you did without stipulations, and moved up 2 weight classes to do it, and didn't make him come in at a catch weight. I would say that would be the biggest win since Leonard defeated Hagler. And I would say, as far as welterweight champs, well, I know some of our buddies, our old school buddies, are not going to like this, but I would say if he beats Canelo and it's clean, doesn't have to knock him down, knock him out, beat him up, but just outboxes him, boy, I have a hard time putting many welterweights ahead of him that aren't named Robinson, Leonard, Hearns, Mickey Walker, and guys like that.
Well, I believe in Crawford. Crawford at his peak against Canelo at his peak. I think that's a modern version of Sugar Ray Robinson against Jake LaMotta as far as how the fights would play out. I think Crawford can handle the weight disadvantage. LaMotta gave Robinson fits in those fights. People forget
he
that.
was 15 pounds bigger on an average.
Right. And
13 pounds.
Right, but he gave him Robinson all he could handle. And I got to believe Canelo would do, Crawford would have to pull out all the stops, fight his rear end off. You know, he couldn't just pick his spots. I don't think Crawford could just give away 3 rounds and be calculating and turn the switch on. He'd have to be focused from the beginning. And but also, we're thinking of Crawford's disadvantage. Canelo might be a little long in the tooth now. Maybe he's not. Maybe he's not. I thought he was slipping a few years ago, and he's kind of deflected that, you know, and didn't let Father Time quite catch up to him. But I think it's gradually.
If Amir Khan could outbox Crawford for 4 or 5 rounds, Canelo,
yeah.
You got to think that Crawford can. I mean, when you look at certain parts of it, you can make a case where, hey, you know what? There's a path here. I want to say the problem will be, I don't know if Crawford can hurt Canelo, but Lara didn't hurt Canelo, and a lot of people thought he won. Mayweather didn't really hurt Canelo. He clearly outboxed him. So I don't know if he has to hurt him to beat him.
Let me put it another way. Do you think Crawford, if he fights Canelo in September, it would be more than 2 years since he beat Errol Spence? Do you think he can be the same fighter that fought Errol Spence? If you think he could be the same exact fighter, you shouldn't be surprised at all, you know, of his ability to beat Canelo.
Jack, if he can get that up, the only question I would have then is, how does he handle the weight, and what weight does he fight? I think he probably comes in the mid-50s. I don't think he comes up to 65 because he can. Maybe he's in the late or the higher 50s. I don't think he's going to use all the weight. I think he's going to try to feel what weight he's at his best, which I don't think he knows. But if he's that guy, it's pretty hard to say he doesn't have a chance.
Well, let me go another way. If the Canelo of the second Golovkin fight somehow arrives in the ring tremendously determined, forget whatever anyone thought of the decision of the second Golovkin fight. The consensus was it should have been maybe called a draw. Canelo got the decision. That people are fine with that as well.
Canelo took it to Golovkin in the second fight.
If he takes it to Crawford the same exact way, showing the same form, can any version of Crawford hold him off? If Crawford hits Canelo with its best punches, can he slow him down enough to outbox him? Or does Canelo just walk through him and Crawford is just fighting to survive the whole fight?
You know, Jack, I don't know if he can just walk through Crawford's power. As I've gotten older, I've realized that, you know, you don't have to hit hard enough. You don't have to knock them out, but you can gain their respect and not let them come at you like you're handcuffed. It's like the same thing. I have a hard time when guys say, well, Leonard pity patted Hagler and, they take away from him. And my answer is, well, if he pity patted Hagler so much and his punches didn't bother him, why didn't Hagler just go rip his head off? And the fact is, his punches were bother him more. Just like, Howard Cosell would always pick on Ali about you're winning decisions, you're not knocking guys out. And Ali had the best line. He says, Howard, I punch hard enough to win. And I think that would apply to Crawford against Canelo. So I think he has enough power to blunt Canelo. My question would be, how does he handle the big shots of Canelo and the body shots? Because we've seen Canelo hit guys on the arms, and all of a sudden they can't hold their hands up. But if Jermell Charlo could go 50 or 12 rounds with him, you got to think Crawford can.
Charlo's very talented, too. Right. You're right as well. No, but it's not about Crawford lasting the distance and losing a clear decision. If Crawford's determined not to get knocked out, he could fight a safety-first fight and go the distance. I don't think anyone questions that.
I don't think that's in him, Jack. He has to fight to win. That's his legacy fight.
I think if Crawford finds himself in a hole, losing like 7 of the first 8 rounds, and it's the 9th, 10th round, and he
has to open up
to win. I think Crawford has it in him. He's going to go.
He has that gear.
He's going to not just not just meet Canelo at mid-ring. I think he goes after Canelo, and he throws everything he has at Canelo. And you want to know something? I'm not sure Canelo would be able to withstand an all-out Crawford attack if this is Crawford in his prime, right on the money, fighting the way Sugar Ray Robinson did against Randy Turpin when he knew he was cut and it was do or die. I mean, Crawford has that type of spectacular, I think, performance in him. But the question is he past his prime now?
I like your comparison with Robinson LaMotta. Here's the thing that throws me off a little bit. I wonder how we would have seen those fights if we lived at that time. Like in 51, would I be thinking, I don't know if Robinson can hurt LaMotta. I don't know if he can stand up to it. I mean, I would love to, wish I could go back to see how I would have felt going in, because it's kind of the same matchup.
Frank, you wouldn't have given it any thought then. You would have thought, he's only giving away. It's only 12, 15 pounds. Yeah,
but I know that's a lot, Jack.
It's a lot now, but at the time, you didn't think so much. Now, if one fighter's fighting, he's 160 pounds, the other's 167. You go, whoa, that's a little bit of a weight differential. But the weight thing.
Back then, they used to give. Look, Bob Satterfield fought Cleveland Williams. And how much weight did he give up in that fight? So yeah, it was different back then.
A completely different mindset. But Crawford Canelo, that's what makes fights sometimes, a lot of the time, so hard to predict. How often we get two fighters fighting that we know at their absolute peaks that there's no X factor. There's always an X factor. There's a guy at his peak. Is he inexperienced now? Does he need more seasoning or this or that? And it's like, I even think sometimes the first Leonard Hearns fight, were they both at their peak? And I'll tell you,
Jack, I was going to mention that. Where Ali Frazier won, they said Ali was rusty because of the layoff, but Leonard Hearns, I kind of think that was like they're both at their peak. Neither guy coming off of any type of inactivity. My thought was the two Duran fights hardened Leonard for a fight like that, where Hearns hadn't quite gone through that. And I felt that gave him an edge.
Yeah, and the perception, they tried, as you know, to make a Leonard Hearns 10-rounder before they had their legendary fight. And Angelo Dundee nixed the fight. He said, let it grow. He didn't like the fight at the time. And on reflection, had they met early in their career in a 10-rounder, I actually think Hearns outpoints Leonard over 10 rounds. Early
Based on the beginning of that fight, I could see that. Yes.
And then Leonard in the rematch, gets his revenge, and then who knows whether they fight a third time or whatever.
All right, Jack. Well, it was a spirited debate. Fun as always. I enjoyed it. I hope you did. And we'll be back next week to cover all things boxing with a little football.
Just a prediction, Minnesota 21, the LA Rams 14 tonight.
Jack, to make it fun, I'll take the Rams. I won't give a score, but I'll take the Rams.
Okay, we'll see.